Hey, Zaka family. Zaka is launching an exclusive membership platform to provide you with career development workshops, coaching, community, and so much more. Go to ZakaConnect.com and sign up to receive information on how to access early registration and perks. Hello, everybody. This is Paul Herman, the Prince of Motivation and host of Zaka Presents My Journey. We're creating this vulnerable and positive platform where you can get inspired and motivated from different leaders from our community. Today, our guest is Zynara Ng, who is a keynote speaker and public speaking coach. Zynara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, the pleasure's all ours. And, I'm going to enjoy our conversation because, I see that you worked at some in some big places. Big places. I'm gonna let the listeners know in advance. Big places, and I'm looking forward to hearing about those big places and how you made the change. Because the changes, I don't even know how you connected the dots, but you did. But before we actually dive into that and connecting those dots with our listeners, could you talk to us a little bit more about your cultural background and like where you're from?
Yeah, absolutely. I am Asian American, and my parents are both Chinese, and they both immigrated here. My dad immigrated here from Hong Kong, and my mom from Burma. So, I am the daughter of two Asian American parents, and I'm really, really proud of that.
And you said you were born here in America.
That's right, San Francisco, California. So I've always been a California native, and all my family and relatives are here. But I carry with me all of my roots, and that's really, really important to me, and how I show up each day.
So talk to us about the roots now. Talk to us about the culture. What does your culture mean to you?
That is such a good question about what culture means to me. I think really it's the values that were instilled in me when I was younger. So, being Asian American, I think I was always taught to respect others, to really respect my elders in particular. But I think it's a very interesting thing when you are taught to always think about others, right? So I think how I show up today, it's really the consideration of others, thinking about others, and putting others first, right? Of course, it has its pros and cons of that, growing up with that really important value. But, that's evolved for me in going into this like journey of my career and figuring out how that can be positive, but where can that also pose as challenges, right? So I've really learned how to instill these really important values, but then also have evolved and taken them and also learned from them, and navigating where that can be challenging too, right? So, but that's how I look at culture, I'd say. I guess it's more of the values that are instilled from my parents and what they've learned from their own parents and beyond, right? And carrying what is important to me and what makes sense, and how can I evolve that for myself, and then also for my future children as well too. So I look at culture maybe more in that way, beyond the delicious food and the traditions, which I very much value. But it's more about the values for me of how I look at culture.
And how is like your experience growing up, like with your family? I know that some of your family's still back home, and then you're over here. Like, how is that? And then obviously being in the area that you were growing up in, like, did you see more people that look like you speak of the native tongue? Like, how does that operate?
Yeah, for sure. So, so my family, we're all in the Bay Area, luckily, but I think growing up, I grew up in a really interesting, it was really interesting. I grew up actually with a lot of people of color, actually, in Union City for the first 12 years of my life, right? And then at a certain point, my parents moved us to the opposite, where we moved to Pleasanton, which is at that time when I was like 12 years old. I remember looking around, everyone was primarily white, and I was the only person of color, right, in these spaces. And so that transition was actually really, really hard for me, right? I definitely met a few friends along the way, but I also remember the hard times too, where I remember being bullied, right? There was a story, you let me know, we should go this deep as well too, but
Hey, come on, we diving in.
I think I really realized how different I was in that time of my life, right? Being in the school, a really high achieving school. It was a very wealthy school. And to be honest, my parents, my family, we didn't grow up rich at all. My parents struggled to sometimes pay the bill for the next mortgage or whatever that was, right? We were renting at that time. So I also recognize that kind of class difference, first of all. And then I also recognize, just because of the color of my skin at that moment, at being like 12 years old, I was just shy little girl. And I was standing in line trying to order some food. And these two white girls who were a year older than me started shoving me and calling me chink. And at that age, I knew that was a really wrong word, right?
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow. Wow.
it was a very tough and like a painful moment for me in that time. But I'm so grateful that I had at least like two friends who were my allies, and they were like, let's go to the principal's office. We're going to find them. And like, there were luckily some consequences thereafter. But for me, it was like that awareness of being that young and recognizing that, hey, I'm actually not, I'm different, right?
Yeah.
Because of
Okay.
the color of my skin, right? So, that's one kind of unique story that I still think about, right? In terms of how young I was and kind of realizing that at that time.
Mm. And
Yeah.
it's sad that a lot of the guests that we have had on the show, they've shared stories of that,
Yeah.
where they were bullied or picked on in some capacity in school,
Right.
or in their upbringing. So it's sad to hear that, but I know that, and that story is obviously, it still sticks with you. Right. It's not like you just
Absolutely.
kind of said, "Oh, it just happened. It's over with." It
Right.
really leaves a little bit of a scar on you. But I know that through your journey, you get to see how you could appreciate your culture even more, because like you said, you are different, and that
Absolutely.
difference brings diversity to any place that you go to, and it's beautiful, right? And like you
Absolutely.
said, you're in your culture, you show up, right? It's like your culture goes into your profession, and so again, sad for those individuals back then. They just didn't know, and kids are kids. So
Totally.
I'm glad
Totally.
that you moved on and kind of processed it in the right way, because it could have went opposite.
Absolutely.
You could have retaliated in a different way and gone to that level. But in your childhood, since we're talking about it, like the childhood memories, do you have like a memory that kind of prompted you for your career?
Yeah.
All the work that you're doing in regards to tech and being into like public speaking, anything in your childhood kind of like got that going?
So when I was like, it's so interesting. I talked about how I was really shy at that age. At some point, I became the opposite of that, where I was a lot more social and I was really extroverted. And so there was later on, I'd say maybe in about high school, I found this like love and passion for performing in theater. So I
Mm,
really I loved the fact, just being involved in something like that on the stage, performing. And so I think that experience prompted this love for theater and then filmmaking, right? So eventually this kind of led me to, I'll talk about kind of the majority of my career and where it's evolved to, in public speaking. So I think it's something about telling stories that really excited me, right? And theater wise, it was telling someone else's story, and
mm,
something about that was really interesting, right? So it also signaled to me eventually when I went to college and found that passion in terms of filmmaking of, hey, how can I tell other people's stories in a way that, people's stories who aren't, you don't hear from, right? People of color, people who are, their stories aren't shared really broadly. Is there a way for me to highlight that? So there was really a curiosity and an interest and an excitement about telling people's stories. And that's led me to eventually, finding a career as a video producer, starting, we can get into some of the details in just a little bit too, but starting really kind of in the traditional media, right, in terms of Hollywood, and then evolving to heading into YouTube, where it's the more online space, which is a
yeah.
totally different space, right? And so I've spent a majority of my career as a video producer, and telling other people's stories has been something that's been really a passion of mine. And that's really evolved into, me figuring out all of these stories I'm telling right now has kind of been a thread, right?
Got you.
if I'm talking about that bullying example, I didn't say anything. I was silent, right? And part of my culture is to keep silent and not to say anything. And in some ways it's to keep your head down, not to cause trouble. But at the same time, there's so much pain from keeping silent. And so a lot of my own personal growth and journey has been learning in spaces, for example, at work, in the most challenging situations where you are challenged. How are you going to show up for yourself? And how are you going to speak up? So I think I've had to learn really the hard way, but there's no other way to learn it, right? Than
Yeah,
these kind of most challenging situations
true.
is finding my own voice, right? And it's those experiences of needing to speak up. There's almost no choice but to, right? And that's led me to this passion of evolving my interest in what I want to do. My life purpose is to help others find their own voices, right? In terms of speaking. So a lot of what I do as a speaker myself is to share my stories in hopes of helping others to share their own stories. And
Mhm.
then as a public speaking coach is to really help people find their own unique voices, because everyone truly does have that voice. And some of us are scared and terrified of how to speak up or even how to share our own stories. But,
Yeah.
that really is my goal. And so it's really evolved from, performing for others and sharing other people's stories to an interest in really helping others find their own stories, right?
Mhm.
Telling their own stories, and for me to tell mine in a really authentic, vulnerable way to encourage others as well. So that's kind of been the through line, I'd say,
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
of the importance of finding your own voice and speaking up, right? So
And it's important to find your voice, especially in this world today. People can get
yes.
lost in the sauce with all the nonsense that goes on. And no disrespect to the media, but that kind of puts a little damper on the way people think and kind of like move through this life that they live in, right?
Yeah.
But when you move with purpose and a clear direction and intentions, things are a lot more different, for those individuals. Now, when it came down to you've obviously have juggled various different types of careers, but before we get more into the careers and the big companies, hint, hint, listeners, the big companies that you work for, could you just give me a little bit of an understanding of like your educational background? Like, I want to know, how did we connect our educational background to like
Yeah.
where you are right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I studied film and media studies at UC Irvine. So California girl, never left. The weather's too nice here. It's hard to leave.
I don't blame you.
Right?
I
It's
don't
hard to
blame
leave.
you.
So, initially, because I mentioned I love the theater, and initially I was like, oh, let me be a theater major. And so I tried that for like 2 months, realized it was really challenging, honestly. I wasn't getting cast anywhere. And then I thought, how interesting would it be to create stories and be kind of behind the scenes, right? So that really developed into this love for filmmaking and sharing other people's stories. So yeah, I majored in film and media studies, and that's kind of where it started. So I always thought I was going to be in Hollywood. My dream was to be like this Hollywood producer, work at a talent agency, blah, 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 blah. And that didn't happen. When I graduated college, it was the worst time in the recession. It was
Oh,
2008. And
oh yeah, yeah.
you remember that time, right? I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
it's a
That was
tough.
everybody was scrambling for that point.
Totally. It was hard. I mean, like I had to move back home, and my whole plan that I had thought was going to work out didn't work out. And so what do you do at that point? You got to kind of start from ground zero again. So
Hmm.
um, I was unemployed, I would say, for about a good, I don't know, 12, 13 months. And, here you are excited for the world, but there's no response from employers. If I'm sending out
Yeah.
resumes left and right, and then you're seeing your friends and your peers getting jobs, it can feel really defeating, right?
Mm.
And I will have to say, there's this one book that changed my life, actually, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And it was because of one book called The Secret. I don't know if have you heard about that book?
Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
have.
Okay. You
Yes,
know
I
about the
have.
principles of The Secret,
That's
right?
that's right. Come
I,
on.
I love it. I love it. So in The Secret, basically, it says that you can dream and achieve anything you want if you truly believe it.
That
That's
is
it.
100%.
as simple as that, right? And there's, of course, ways of visually manifesting, but it's really about manifesting your true dreams. But it comes from truly believing in yourself and believing that it will happen.
Mhm.
And once I read that book, I mean, it's kind of a crazy story. Okay, so I I'm sitting at home. I'm sitting in bed. I was kind of depressed, right? I haven't had a job for like over a year. I've been
Yeah.
applying to these
Yeah.
jobs. At that
The
time in my life,
frustration. Yeah, the frustration
frustration,
kicks in. Yeah.
right? That time in my life, my dream, because dreams evolve, and I think it's okay if your idea of what you wanted to do changes over time. I think it's normal. I feel like I've had 2 or 3 careers already so far, and I'm sure there's going to be more, and I'm excited about that. So at that time, my dream was to work at DreamWorks Animation, and I had my resume all set up, and I'd sent my resume to this one job post that had been up for a few weeks. I sent it like once a week, the same resume, no response, right? I kid you not, as soon as I read the book, The Secret, I like implemented it. You're supposed to visualize it, imagine that you already have the job, like all these exercises and truly believing that I had the job. So I had that. I was like, you know what? What's it's not going to hurt me to try these things. At the
I'm
time, I thought it,
I'm
right?
at home.
Yeah,
I'm,
I got
I'm at home.
nothing. I'm watching the Gilmore Girls. I was like, you know
Yeah,
what?
come
Let's
on.
just let's just
Next
do this,
episode,
right?
let's go. Let me dream a little bit.
Exactly. So, I tried to embody these things, and then with this mindset, I was like, okay, well, let me just try and submit the same resume to the same job once again. Can't hurt, right? So I submitted it that same night. Within 6 hours, the next morning I'm driving because I was like volunteering at a nonprofit. I was driving and I see this number. It was this crazy experience where it was like some number I had never seen before. And for some reason, I knew, call it the universe or some kind of soul calling, whatever that was. I knew it was DreamWorks. And I was too scared to pick up the phone. So I let it go to voicemail. I was like sweating. I was like screaming. And then sure enough, I played the voice message and it was the recruiter from DreamWorks saying she'd like to interview me for the role. So fast forward, long story
Hey, come
short,
on. Come on.
which is crazy. I went through this process. I eventually got a job offer, but I declined it, which is crazy. This is exactly, Paul. I know, I get it. There's confusion now, right?
You told me. You're like, I just want to graduate. I haven't been working for a whole year. You finally get your dream job and you say no.
because
Okay, drop it on me.
during this time, there was some other calling happening. I don't know why, but there was so much cool stuff happening at YouTube, at Google at that time, right? Like that excited me. And I was like, you know what? I'm already manifesting. Let's keep on manifesting, right? Why stop here? So at the same time, while I was interviewing at DreamWorks, threw my hat in the ring for Google for like an entry level role. And the next day, same kind of thing happened as well. They were like, hey, we'd like to interview you. Went through this whole crazy process for months. Ended up eventually getting a job offer at the same time that DreamWorks offered me the same, their role. So I had to make this. It was at this crossroads where
If you were
it was.
sweating in the car, I could only imagine at that point.
I was sweating. Okay, I was actually in Hawaii with my family too.
Oh, you was definitely sweating.
I was sweating because of the tropics, but the decisions.
Natural sweat.
So it's so interesting with that crossroads of having something where I thought was my dream, DreamWorks, with this kind of new exciting dream of like Google, YouTube, where it was like I saw the future there. And in chatting with people, there was this pool of like, I feel like there's something here, and following this intuition, this gut. And I took the biggest risk of my life. I declined DreamWorks actually without fully knowing I'm going to get this offer from Google. It was this whole crazy story. It was like a 1 day apart difference where I could have had nothing in 1 day. But
true. The wrong decision would have.
No, absolutely. But I had this faith that I was like, you know what? I've got to follow my gut on this, right? So declined DreamWorks. They're like, all right. And then the next day I was waiting for 24 hours, waiting for if I'm going to get an offer or not. Luckily that came through and took that job. And, 13 years later, I had really spent my career at Google as a video producer and developing my skills and telling people stories. So crazy story. And then that's evolved as well too, which is another, just evolution of my career. But long story short, that's kind of how that all evolved and started.
And I admire that story and that journey that you just kind of, I know obviously it's a lot longer than that, but you kind of broke it down into a very small part for us. I admire the words you said. You said faith. You had faith at that point. You had to trust your gut. And I always bring these things back up because a lot of the guests said somewhat of the same thing when it came to that fork in the road, where they had to kind of make that choice and say, do I want this? But I do like when you're talking about the secret now, because it's about envisioning. And if we think back to our grandparents and our parents, right, they came here with that same secret, right? They didn't even have the book, but they had that inside of them saying that I'm going to envision that my kids, that my grandkids are going to live a better life than I was living where I was coming from, right? So they kind of wrote their own book before they even came to America, and it kept
Yes.
on envisioning, and as you can see, it flourished into so many beautiful things. From us growing up to being the adults that we are right now, having the professions that would have never happened if our parents, grandparents, and our ancestors, in a sense, didn't kind of push for that. For us,
Yes.
it's a beautiful thing to kind of hear that story, where it picked up where you picked up, but there's so much more behind that story, and that came from, like, obviously your parents and stuff like that. So it's beautiful. It's
I love
beautiful.
that. I
and,
love that.
and the fact that you're at you know in film, you're in Google, you're in YouTube. What was like an accomplishment, in this time frame? Like, what is like one of
Yeah.
the largest accomplishments that you accomplished? It seems like every day was an accomplishment, but like something that you could walk away and be like, you know what, that one right there.
I think one of the biggest things that I'm really proud of was taking on this crazy, amazing project, filming this series in the Middle East and North Africa. I was basically given this opportunity of creating a series to highlight stories of YouTube creators from the Middle East and North Africa, all in Arabic. I don't speak Arabic, and
Woo!
I've never been to the Middle East and North Africa. It, it was a huge undertaking, but I worked with really amazing people. And the thing is, what I'm so proud of is, of course, the journey of even figuring out these stories and then going there, meeting these people, capturing these beautiful stories in Morocco, Dubai, just amazing stories. But I think what I walked away from was just finding the true stories and like the people vulnerably sharing who they are and how they got to where they are and still showing up. It's like I was so inspired by those stories.
Mhm.
Like one creator specifically shared the story with me. Her name is Miriam, and she has a YouTube channel at that time, I think, just kicked off with 1 million subscribers. And she did like a makeup and hair kind of like lifestyle YouTube channel. She grew up in Morocco. So when I first met her, she shared the story where she, in this like basically rural community where her family only had enough money to give her each day, just enough for lunch or to take that money and go to school 4 hours away. So each day she would take her pocket money, go to school for 4 hours just to travel there, come back. And she told me she would look up at the stars and just believe that there was something bigger out there for her. And when she told me the story, I was like crying and just like so touched by where she comes from and like what her life purpose is. And I had the privilege of filming her meeting these young girls who are so inspired by her. So we went to this first event where she met her fans for the first time, and these young
Mhm.
girls are coming up crying and just thanking her for like inspiring them and like making them believe that they also have opportunities, right? So I think
Sure.
beyond just this project is just meeting these incredible people and for them to like open up and tell us their stories. Like my job was to find that and help tell that in a beautiful way. And
Yeah.
that is something that I walked away with, just like loving that experience and something that I'll never forget, you
Mhm.
know? And
It's definitely a beautiful experience, but it's also a hard thing because that's like a role you got to take on. You're like, how do you capture someone's life? I mean, obviously we never lived it, right? So you're like trying to find a way to make it so beautiful and probably even understanding to the individuals watching. to know like what
Absolutely.
that felt like and stuff, So it's an honor to have individuals like yourself that took those roles to kind of help people. Because like you said, everyone has a story, but not everybody has wants to utilize their voice to tell their story, right? And you
Absolutely.
found a way through your work to do that for other individuals and for other groups, which is beautiful because that is a hard thing to do, right? You're not hearing it from the horse's mouth, but you got to hear it from the producer, right? And the producer got to put it together, got to put it together right. Now, for moving around from, film to Google to YouTube, you've been in very diverse backgrounds, very different job professions and stuff. Like, how do you feel like your experience has shaped you and your ability and to thrive in different environments? Like, in diverse environments too. Like, how are you thriving every time? What's the secret?
That's a really good question. You know, I feel like that's always like it's a work in progress, right? And I thank you for the kind feedback. It's funny sometimes when I look at myself and like where I am, it's still like you still go through all these challenges, right? Whether it's like work challenges or what appear like things that are out of your control, right? And
Sure.
I don't know what the right word is, but you know, it's a daily reminder for myself, honestly, when I'm second guessing myself, because there is that truly sometimes when I walk into spaces, even spaces that I've like, done well in, I still feel like an imposter sometimes, right? Or that like I'm not enough. So that I do carry that with me.
Mhm.
And it's a daily practice and reminder for myself, you know, where I have to really like just remind myself that I do believe in myself, right? It's that constant like reminder that I am enough and that I can be in these spaces, right? Even though I might feel uncomfortable or even though I feel scared, I'm still going to show up anyway, right? So I think it's like a mixture of reminding myself um, of that faith in myself, right? And reassuring myself, but then also still moving ahead, even when you're terrified. So I
Yeah.
can't, I can't say confidently that like, hey, I've gotten this down. Like I would be a lie. I would be a liar if I said that. And I think that's what makes us human is that whatever accomplishments that we have, I think it is really natural for us to sometimes feel fear or like, doubt, right? And so I think it's maybe embracing it and reminding myself, hey, look, I'm here for a reason and I can do this, whatever I might be scared of, and still moving ahead, right? And still like doing it anyway. So I would say that's kind of my mixed, answer for that question.
And now with the diverse environments, right? We like I just said, the film, the YouTube, the Google and stuff. You then transition into a public speaking coach. So you have worn multiple hats, right? And now we enter this public speaking, right, coach? Talk to me about that. Like, how is this new lifestyle for you, right? And obviously, it's totally different from the other ones you were doing, right? Just moving around like that. So, how did that even, come about?
Yeah. I again, I feel like everything is like such a journey and like everything's always changing and evolving.
True.
And I think there was just something in me that it was so interesting when I would be on film sets or producing. There was this element of like directing that I loved as well too, of helping guide people. And in that, I found this really it just seems so natural for me. I don't know what it is, but I love connecting with individuals and finding that spark in them or finding that voice in them or whatever that is and helping them get there when I'm able to see that like transition or that like change immediately, like it really just excites me and drives me, right? So I think it kind of started from that of like helping guide people on the set, directing. And then I
Hmm.
realized that, you know, folks are a lot of people are really scared to speak, right? Whether it's in a meeting, in a conference room, whatever that may be, people are really scared. And I think there was this big curiosity to help ease that and help people feel more comfortable being who they are, showing up as who they are, and
Hmm.
help people guide, just to help guide them to find their voices. So I think it really started from that, and it's something that still excites me to this day of helping people find that.
And it sounds like a little bit more that self-development, right?
Absolutely.
That brings me to the next thing, the TEDx talk, right?
Yeah.
Right. And you often highlight in your talks about the development, self-development and healing, right? Could you like talk about like maybe like an obstacle in your career where you kind of had to leverage self-growth to overcome?
Absolutely. You know, I feel like I've learned the most just dealing with different types of people. And sometimes, obviously, it's in your personal life, of course. There's family, there's friends, there's relationships, but
Yeah.
also, professionally, in that context, I've learned so much about myself because of these experiences. In particular, when I worked at YouTube, there, I would say I was still really early on in my career as a video producer, and I hadn't really fully developed my own voice. So, I mentioned that I was like really quiet kind of growing up. I kind of got out of my shell. Coming into the workforce, it's different because at a larger company, you're trying to figure out how to fit in. You're trying to make sure you are performing, and there's so many things that you're always thinking about. And at that time in my life, I just realized I was just so careful about everything and just too scared to speak up or find my voice. And at that time, I'm not going to lie to you, there were so many people that came into my life that served as bullies, right? We talked about actually bullies when I was younger. So, and I truly believe that similar types of people come into our lives if we have not found a way to interact or deal with them, right? So
I'm agree with you on that.
right? So the
Yeah.
fact that similar people, right, coming in and out of my life were bully figures, looking back on that now, I was like, oh, okay, that's because Zynara, you haven't developed your voice or set those boundaries or have really spoken up about things, right? So at that time, I just remember getting like people would take advantage. Like I remember I had a colleague who was more senior than I was, and she threw this big project at me and kind of threw me under the bus. And I didn't say anything in this meeting, right? I just kind of let her do it. And as a result, I had to deal with the consequences. And similarly, it just kept happening throughout, right? And I guess where I'm leading to is one specific story. One of my managers, I had several, I can't exactly remember what happened because it was so long ago now, but I remember preparing with her and our team to prepare for a big presentation to our director at that time. So I felt really prepared and I felt really good to go. And so when I presented, my manager at that time put me down in front of everybody in that room, including
How many people?
I'd say 5 or 6 people.
I mean, it's still wrong. I'm just saying, like,
Oh
no
yeah.
matter how many people in the room, like, I'm just wondering, like, is this like a conference?
Absolutely.
We got thousands
Mm-mm.
of people in front of you.
Oh no, that would
Oh,
be yeah. No, I can't even imagine that. But even 5 or 6 people
yeah, of course, yeah.
was just I couldn't believe it, to be honest. And luckily, my director complimented me several times in that. But for some reason, my manager had to like put me down for whatever reason, and I didn't say anything at that time. And I remember ending the meeting, going into another conference room, crying my eyes out because I didn't know A, what happened here.
Wow,
And
wow, wow.
and B, I knew that this was wrong. And so having that experience, I was like, Zynara, you better say something about this. I don't care who you are, right? And it's actually harder when it's a person of an authoritative figure, right? And I mentioned as I mentioned before, coming from an Asian culture, speaking up against authority was something that
Yeah,
we
it was
were
wrong.
never
Yeah,
taught to do, right?
that's correct.
But due to my own like personal like challenges, I was like, this is a moment for me, and I have to really address this. So I had my one-on-one with my manager, and I straight up told her that that was not acceptable. That was absolutely not acceptable, and I don't think anyone has ever called her out before. And she actually took a moment,
Yep, once that
And,
happens, they
you
just
know,
they're at that level where like no one's gonna call me out. I'm good.
no, absolutely. And yeah, I won't say too much about her, but all I'll say is because I have a lot to say, but I won't say too much in this session. That's an offline session, all right?
Yeah,
But
yeah. I hit you up after.
yeah, there we go, there we go. Um, but I think the important part for me was that she did acknowledge that she did overstep, right?
Okay,
She did
good,
cross that line and she
good.
apologized and she said, "Thank you for giving me that feedback," because she said people don't give her a whole lot of feedback. And so I walked away from that like feeling really empowered, actually, even though I was terrified. I was scared out of my mind, but I did it anyway. Right. And like I
Mm,
mentioned, that's what I kind of try to lead with. Right.
yeah,
But I
do what's right.
knew but I knew it was a really important moment for me, right? Of helping me find my own voice, right? And that's kind of helped grow into like more of my passion of helping other people find their own voices. And it doesn't have to be in this really big way. It can be in these little moments, right? A conversation, a setting a boundary, or saying something. So for me, I would say that was a really critical moment in helping me kind of like define, or help me pursue more of what I'm really interested in, which is to help other people find their voices.
Hmm. And when talking about finding people's voices, and also first before I get into that, thank you for sharing that story. Right, you've been definitely sharing a lot of stories that have like left like a, I don't want to say a scar on you, but it kind of leaves like at that moment of like, okay, but in every time you have these stories, you always do what's the right thing.
Mm.
You still have a voice, but you do it in the right way. You say, okay, I'm going to voice when that first individuals, the group of children, kids had done something to you. You didn't say, you know what, I'm going to the principal. That's how you voiced it. You didn't voice it in like coming back and pushing them. And the same thing with your manager. Like you said, you're at this office. You have someone who has a lot more authority over you. A lot of the guests have said in their coming up in that corporate environment, they always kind of felt a little bit worried or afraid to say something out of pocket. They didn't want to look like the angry African American woman, or they didn't want to seem that they had like an attitude in the office. So they would just kind of stay quiet. And like you said, in certain cultures, you just don't talk back. You keep your head down and you keep moving. So it's kind of hard when you have your culture telling you to do one thing, but the version of you in the world that we live in now is saying something totally different. So you're like
Absolutely.
caught in the middle. You're like, do I stay true to what I know, or do I have my own voice? Still stay true to that, but find another way around it. And you definitely
Yes.
did. So kudos to you, because some people, they say, you know what, I'm gonna live by the past.
Yeah.
My culture is gonna lead me in the direction where I need to go, but then they don't get their point across. And it
Yeah.
seems like you definitely did over the time. So kudos to you for doing that. I know there's a lot more stories like that. A lot
Thank
more
you.
stories, but we gonna talk. We ain't gonna spill that tea right now. We're gonna get to that. Could you share like a piece of advice of for aspiring like public speakers, especially those who might struggle with confidence and expressing, their thoughts and their ideas? I know it's not easy, like you said, it's not easy to get on a microphone or on a podcast or and get in front of a group of people. Now, mind you, a lot of people have a lot of amazing stories, but it's just that moment of like, do I do it? How do I do it? And how do I come across genuine when I do it?
Yeah. I think I think the thing to remember is that there is no one like you or me in this moment with all of our experiences that we've had that are here today. Like all of us have such unique lives and stories to tell and experiences that are none like anyone else's. And I think that's what I would encourage anyone who is like maybe afraid to speak or like not sure whether or not they should take that moment and just like share their story. And the fact is that it is so important, right? It's so important because your story might inspire someone else's or they might connect with that, right? And
True.
again, I think that's why it's so important to be able to like highlight people's stories. It's so important. So yeah, to that I'd say yes, it might be scary, but you got to do it anyway. It's so important to be able to share your story, whatever format. It doesn't have to be in this big public way. Maybe it's
True.
sharing your
Write it out.
writing it out, or even
Draw it out.
having draw it out different formats, or even having the courage to share more of who you are to someone, right? Like that's it. It doesn't even have to be in this big way. But what if you could share more of who you are and more of your story to someone else that you haven't shared before, right? So it's that courage of just being open and being who you are. And I think that is the biggest thing that I'd say, and that I encourage anyone who's afraid to, is just to be more of who you are, regardless, because it's important.
And coming from someone who worked at YouTube, I think to kind of tie in that, I think that a lot of people who have those stories that are kind of afraid in a sense to kind of get out there because of confidence, they probably think the only way to do it is what's in the way society is doing it the most right now. Do the Instagrams and the TikToks and the YouTubes. So then they're saying, I want to do it too, but I don't know if I fit in that bracket. I don't know if I could fit it in. So they have to know that they can navigate a different way, right? Or find individuals like yourself at that time to let you tell the story then, if that's the case, on that type of platform. But it's that moment in time where they're like, because YouTubes and Instagrams and TikToks and all these other things are very big right now. So people might be thinking like, oh, it's that's the only way to do it. When you're saying there's several other ways to do it. So I think that's where the listeners who are out there, they don't have to have a massive channel with a whole bunch of following. They just need to know that they could still tell their story, but in a different way.
Absolutely.
And what do you tell like immigrants who come to this country who fear public speaking and becoming and also not just only fear in public speaking, but also fear in the fact that which a lot of our guests did speak about previously, about having an accent when they speak.
Yeah. If I take a look at people who I truly admire and people's stories who resonate with me, it's when they speak really truthfully from the heart. And it's those vulnerable stories. And it doesn't even matter if there's an accent or not, or honestly, anything, right? It comes back to like how open you can be and how real you can be and how vulnerable you can be about sharing your story, because it all boils down to that, right? People always ask me all the time, even when it comes to like filmmaking, they're like, does it have to be like this beautiful? Like, does it have to be in this big platform? Does it have to look amazing? And I always tell them it comes back to the story, right? It doesn't even matter. If it looks great, no one's going to watch if it's not authentic, if it's not real, right?
Oh,
so the people
that's
who
right.
I really resonate with, I would say for immigrants, is to realize that there's so much power in their own stories, in their own unique stories, and being vulnerable, right? Opening up and sharing what makes them unique, right? Some of the challenges, whatever that might be, that really define who they are. That's what people really love. And that's what people root for. They don't care about the accents or whatever that might be, right? It just comes back to like the story and who people really are and how they share that. So that's what I would say for people who might be like struggling with that or apprehensive.
Mm-hmm. And they people have to embrace that. More importantly, like that's a part of their
Absolutely.
culture. That makes it
Absolutely.
different. That also adds to the story. That adds to the
Absolutely.
story. That adds to the making that story so much more beautiful.
I agree with you. I
That
agree.
that accent, I get a little jealous sometimes myself. My family members are Caribbean, so when they come,
Love it.
they having a Caribbean accent. I'm just like, hey, look, I missed this. Someone help me out.
I love it.
I'm like, I
But you're
want to
right.
get my accent like that, but shout out to that. I think it's
Absolutely.
beautiful, and I like hearing people when they have their accent and they speak up on it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing because
Absolutely.
it lets me know that I'm speaking to someone from somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's beautiful,
Absolutely.
and I don't even have to be there.
Yeah,
But I know
totally.
that you are.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm connected to the source.
Yep.
Yes.
There we go.
What are like some of the aspirations and goals? I know you have accomplished a lot over the past couple of years, and through your journey and your story, like you have really expressed a lot of like ups and definitely a lot of downs. But you have definitely hit some big goals. Like even if you didn't go to DreamWorks, you still got the offer,
Yeah.
right? So that was on the bucket list. So like, what are like some of those aspirations and goals for the future? I know you have your coaching that you're doing as well too, but like some things that you can kind of let the listeners know what's up next for you.
I love it. I think the biggest goal for myself is like also pushing myself to put myself out there continually, right? And I want to create more content to help others. So I have a lot of big ideas for this year, but a lot of it for sure is creating more content. I have a podcast that I'm actually producing right now where it's highlighting women of color, for
Let's
example,
go.
right? Of sharing their stories, because I think we all are sometimes afraid of doing what we really want to do. And I'm highlighting really amazing, fantastic female, like just CEOs or just like badass women, right? Like, and that's what is so exciting. And I think I want to share those stories and encourage others, right? So I'm always thinking about how can I share more of these stories to inspire others. So look out for that sometime soon. And then I just want
Okay.
to create more content and do more public speaking at conferences. And so yeah, that's the goal of just kind of like creating, right? That's just
Hmm.
the high level goal of just creating. So I'm
Oh,
really excited,
you
you
on that
know.
wavelength. I like how you
There
speak
we
it. You're like,
go.
just create. And
Just
whoever
create.
wants the information will find it.
Absolutely.
Let's
And
not, and I like how you're so genuine about it. It's not like you're like, I need to create because I want the world to see me. You're like, I'm going to create, and
yes,
whoever finds the message will then receive it the way it needs to be received and hopefully pass that message on to the next person. Right?
absolutely. Because
You're doing it.
I'm trying, because I think what would stop me is like all the fears. But look, I'm just saying, let's just do it and just create, even if it's one small step. Let's just do it anyway, right? And not think about
Yeah.
for anything else. I just want to just create because I am personally passionate about it and I'm excited. So
Mm.
yeah, I'm excited to see what kind of unfolds. But yep, that's what it is. Creating. That's for this year.
Okay. And any final last words for our listeners before we conclude on our conversation today?
I'm just really grateful, and I love what you all are creating with this podcast and for Zaka. Just like again, my parents are immigrants, and that's such a near and dear thing to my heart. And like, I just love what you all are doing, inspiring others, right? To kind of follow their dreams and to really believe in themselves and their voices. And I just want to say I'm really grateful for this conversation, and I'm excited for all the things that you all continue to do here.
Well, I'm excited to listen to your podcast, and also probably be sitting in the back at your book signing one of these days, because you just got a bucket list of stuff that I'm just gonna be like, look, I'm like one of your biggest fans right now.
You're
Sit.
so sweet.
I'm joining in. I'm joining in. I'm tapping in.
I
I'm
love it.
tapping in. And also to our listeners, if you want to hear about more inspirational stories like Zynara, please check us out on ZakaConnect.com. Follow our social at Zaka Connect and follow our feed, Zaka, wherever you listen to your podcasts.